What's up, fellow polymaths? In this video of the Java Fundamentals tutorial, we'll be going over arrays. Arrays are variables that can store a fixed number of values of the same data type. So instead of having separate variables for each value, you can instead use an array. The square brackets are used to declare an array variable. So here in our examples, we have two array declarations where we list the data type, in this case a string, and then after the string comes the square brackets and then the name of the variable. So this is the preferred way to declare an array. The other way you can declare an array, a variable, is to list the data type and then after the variable and then the square brackets in front of the variable name. It can also be used, but it's much less seen and less preferable. In arrays, you can initialize an array by inserting values of the data type in between the curly braces separated by the commas. So in this example, we have a string called dog names, and we have four values named Rex, Lassie, Beethoven, and Snoopy. So in this case, we're initializing the values with these four strings of dog names. And we also have an example of an integer array where we initialize the numbers variable. Another way to initialize an array is to assign a fixed number to the variable using the new keyword. So in example, we have a number integer array, and then we assign it to hold just 10 values in the number variable. So here we're going to initialize an integer array called numbers, and then we're going to initialize it with set values. Let's output the length of this numbers array, and you'll see what I mean. So here we see that there's 7 values in this numbers variable. Arrays are zero-based. That means that the first index starts at 0. So in pretty much most programming languages, for arrays, instead of starting at the number 1, it starts at 0. So if you have 5 values in an array, for example, the order of those values are 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So even though there's 5 values, the arrays are accessed from index 0 to index 4. So the first index is 0, the second index is 1, third index is 2, and so on. To access the element of an array, you use the index number to the corresponding value. Here we have our initialized numbers integer array, and here we want to access some values in the array. So let's do that. So let's get the first index, which is going to be 0, and let's get the second index, which will be index of 1. And let's get the last index. Basically how you do this is you'll grab the numbers dot length minus 1. So here for our first index we have 1, of course, so right here. And our second index is going to be 3 right here. And our last index is 729 right here. So if you see here, for this last index, we call the numbers.length minus 1. So remember, arrays start with 0. So numbers.length will call the whole length of the array. So in this case, there will be 7. But when we're calling the last array, we'll have to subtract 1 from the total length of the array, or else we'll get an array index out of bounds error. Let me just do that right now so I can show you what I mean by that. So here we're going to get we'll just call this out of bounds error. And I believe there's 7 here, so we'll just put 7 right here. So as you see here, it ran the first 3 print line statements. And then once it got to this statement right here, the compiler checked this numbers array and it saw that there was an index of 7, but there's only 7 values, which means that the array 7 was too large for the initial amount for the numbers array. So it threw an array index out of bounds exception. You can change the value of a specific index in an array by referring to its index number. So let's take our initial numbers array and let's make a small change. So in the third index, which will be 27, let's change that to 2000. So now we're going to call that. So before we do that, let's call it first the before and after. So like Captain Ginyu, it changes. So before we add our index 3 was the value of 27, and index 3 after we changed is now 2000. So with arrays, the drawback is that you can only store a fixed number of elements in the arrays. They're not very dynamic. So this can be resolved utilizing classes from the collections framework, such as an array list. So the array list and other collections classes like linked lists, those will be discussed later on as we go along in the tutorial. As we saw in the code, the length property is used to retrieve the size of the number of elements in the array. So one note is that the length property for arrays is different, or the length property for an array is different than the length method from the string class. So the string length method contains the parentheses, whereas the length property for arrays does not. So just remember that when you're dealing with arrays and strings. The usefulness with arrays is that they can be looped using either a while loop, for each loop, or just a regular for loop. Loops we'll be discussing later on, but I'll show you a quick example in the code. So here we're just going to create a simple for loop, and you'll understand what this is all, how this works later on. So here we're just initializing a test variable that will be looping through the numbers array. So we're going to say I is less than numbers.length, because then we're going to increment I as we go through the loop. Then we're going to call each value in that numbers array. So here we see that all the values in that numbers array were output to the command line, all 7 of them on each individual line. Multi-dimensional arrays contain more than one array. So you can think of a regular array as one line, and a multi-dimensional array as like a rectangle or a chessboard or a spreadsheet for 2 arrays, or like a cube for 3 arrays, and so on. So to declare a multi-dimensional array, you just use an extra square bracket, and to initialize the array, you can use an extra curly braces within the curly braces separated by a comma. So in this example, we have our multi-array numbers, and it features 2 arrays, and within this array there's 2 arrays right here. So to access the elements of the multi-array numbers array is similar to accessing an element from a one-dimensional array. Let's say, for example, we want to access the number 27. We will be retrieving the second array, which, remember, is an index of 1, and within that element we'll be retrieving the 4th element, which is an index of 3. So first we'll initialize our multi-numbers array. Let's say 2-dimensional, just to be a bit more exact. Then we're going to initialize this, give it values. So in this array, we're going to have 2 arrays within the array. So here, let's do the power of 2. Here we'll do the power of 3. So here we want to access the number 27. The number 27 is going to be in this array right here. So think of this as 0 and then 1. So there's 2 arrays in here. And the array here is 0 and the array here is 1. So within this one, the first array, or the array index of 1, I know it sounds confusing, but just please bear with me. So here we have 7 values. So in this case, the 27 is the 4th value in this array. But remember, array is 0 based, so it starts from an index of 0. So this is going to be index 3. So let's put that in. So in this case, what we'll do is call the 2-dimensional array, and then first row in this right here is going to be getting the array that we want to get that value of 27. So in this case, it's going to be 1, because remember, this array represents 0 index, and this array represents 1. So since we want this 27, it's in the 0, 1, 2, 3, 3rd index. So here, we put a 3 right there. And then when we output this, ta-da, we get the number 27, just as we wanted. So if we want to do another value, we just pick another one at random. Let's say 32. So right here. So this is going to be the 0, the first array, which will be the 0. And then this will be 32, which is, since there's 6 values in this array, so this will be index 5. It's also the last value in this array, so we can also do a numbers.length -1 as well. There we go. So we got our 32 that we wanted. So remember this right here, since the reason why this extra square index was needed is because it's a 2-dimensional array, and we're trying to get the value of the first array right here within this whole array. So we're just trying to get the first array here. So that's why we have to add this 0 here. So just the compiler, it makes it so the compiler recognizes that, oh, you're trying to call this first array right here. So that's why we put the 0 here. And then after that, we put the dot length, which gives the length of this first array, and then -1 to get the last index of that array. So for looping through multi-dimensional arrays, a nested for loop is used to access all of the elements of the multi-dimensional array. And a nested for loop, you can think of it just as a for loop inside another for loop. So the number of for loops you use in a nested for loop will be dependent on how many arrays your variable has. So in our case, we have 2 arrays in our multi-dimensional arrays. So we'll be using 2 for loops. So we're going to create 2 for loops here. Then we're going to create another for loop. And again, we'll be learning about for loops in more detail later on in the tutorial. So for now, I'm just showing you an example just so you're able to see the power of for loops and working with arrays. So here we have our output. So in this case, what happens here is that first it starts on the first array here in this whole array, in this whole 2-dimensional array. So it outputs all of the first array first, so 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and 32. And then after that, the loop, the nested loop, then searches the next array that's in the 2-dimensional array, and then outputs those values. So 1, 3, 9, 27, 81, and so on. All right, so in our assignment on arrays today, we have 5 questions here. So number 1, what characters are used to declare an array variable? Number 2, true or false, regular arrays can be dynamically sized. Number 3, what number represents the first index of an array? Number 4, write code that will output the number 6 from the following integer array. And number 5, write code that will output the length of the array from question 4. If this video was of any value to you, then please leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.